My name is Catherine. I'm a 25-year-old, pretty average office worker. I live alone, having moved away from my family home. I was born in a rural area, but I moved to New York for a job, working in the accounting department of a trading company. Also, I've been in a relationship for a year. My boyfriend's name is Mike. He's 27. Mike works as a sales rep for one of the companies we do business with and occasionally visits my office. At first, we'd only exchange greetings, but we eventually discovered that we were from the same state, which got us talking. He, too, moved to the city for work.
How about grabbing a bite together sometime?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
He started inviting me out on dates.
Hey, would you mind sharing your number with me?
Of course, I'd be happy to.
Since then, we naturally began dating. Then, on the first anniversary of our relationship, he proposed. Given my age, the timing seemed just right. I loved Mike and thought it would be wonderful to be with him forever. There was no reason to say no.
I accept your proposal.
I replied. That's when Mike started sharing more about his background.
Actually, my family runs a company.
Really?
Yeah, I plan to quit my current job and eventually move back to help out. It's called Turner Paper. Have you heard of it?
Of course. That's a big company.
Exactly. No one in the state doesn't know about it. We even have TV commercials.
I couldn't believe Mike's family owned that Turner Paper. Turner Paper is a well-known company, ranking in the top 10 in revenue within the state. The running CEO is the second generation, and I started to wonder if Mike might become the third.
That's amazing. So, you're like a trust fund kid?
Well, something like that. Catherine, you're lucky to have been chosen by me.
He said this with a smug look, making me chuckle awkwardly. Was he always this cocky? If he planned to quit and return home, why didn't he mention this before proposing? It was the first time I felt something was off about him. If we got married, what would happen to my job? I had told Mike before that my dream was to gain experience in corporate accounting and eventually help my dad with his real estate business. Was he considering that at all? I thought about asking him but decided against it, assuming he must have some plan in mind. He hadn't asked me to quit my job right away, so I figured moving back must still be a distant prospect. We could discuss it later. Or so I thought. However, from that day on, Mike started to change, or rather, his true nature began to show. Mike's stories became increasingly focused on bragging about his family.
I've never had to worry about money. The employees at my dad's company call me the Little Prince and always treat me like royalty. So, Catherine, you'll benefit from all of that too.
Even though Mike said all those things, I didn't feel happy at all. In fact, I started to feel annoyed by his arrogance and constant talk about his family.
Why did you take your current job before deciding to take over the family business?
Isn't it obvious? It's for the prestige. Not that it matters much. It was my dad's connections that got me the job anyway. Oh, by the way, I just bought another car. Well, technically, it's on my dad's, or rather, the company's dime.
Mike, who had never seemed full of himself before, started speaking with an air of superiority. It felt like he had become a completely different person. I used to love his humble, unpretentious personality. Was I really making the right choice by marrying him? He hadn't told me anything about taking over the business or moving back to his hometown, and my doubts about him only grew. Since I'd already accepted his proposal, I felt I couldn't just take it back. About a month after the proposal, I went to meet Mike's parents. Their house was a massive 3-story mansion, befitting a family that owned a manufacturing company. The sprawling garden featured expensive-looking sculptures, and a pond filled with vibrant koi fish swam gracefully.
Each one cost tens of thousands of dollars. This one even won an award in the country.
Though he seemed proud, I couldn't really relate. They also owned 6 luxury cars, including a Mercedes and a Ferrari, all of which were apparently purchased with company funds. I couldn't help but think if he really had to point that out. Something about it didn't sit right with me. The doubt lingered in my mind. Once inside, Mike introduced me to his parents.
So, Catherine, what do your parents do for a living?
Mike's mother, Emily, asked immediately, probing into my family background.
My father works in real estate.
I replied, only to hear Mike's father, John, mutter.
That's not much of a job.
What a rude thing to say, especially to someone you've just met. What's wrong with working in real estate? I felt a surge of anger, but held it back. Knowing I couldn't afford to ruin the atmosphere, I forced a smile.
Well, calm down. They're just regular people unlike us.
That's right. It would be rude to expect anything more from commoners.
What are they saying? I was speechless. They genuinely believed they were superior to others and that ordinary people were beneath them. What frightened me even more was how naturally they said it, without a hint of malice, as if it were a universal truth. It felt like I had wandered into a parallel dimension, and the sheer absurdity of it all made me nauseous. I couldn't imagine a future with this family. Anxiety raced through my mind.
So, Catherine, you're working in accounting, right?
Yes, I am.
Great. You can work for us after the wedding.
The CEO himself is offering you a job. Isn't that wonderful?
We're counting on you, Catherine.
Before I could say anything, the conversation took off without me. I glanced at Mike for help, but he just smiled and laughed along with his parents.
Wait a minute. I
tried to interrupt, but no one seemed to care what I had to say. After enduring the rest of the visit, we finally left. Alone with Mike, I knew I had to bring up all the doubts I'd been holding in and have an honest conversation about our future.
When are you planning to move back home?
As soon as we're married. So you should start getting ready too.
Wait a minute. You never told me that.
I told you we'd be moving back home.
Yes, but I thought it was something further down the road. Besides, I'm not planning to quit my job.
The conversation wasn't going anywhere.
Why not? Working at my family's business would be better for you. It's much bigger than your current company.
But I'm not ready to leave my job right now.
Still, it's a no-brainer. It's more secure and easier than working at that company of yours.
I hated the way he belittled my company, and I couldn't stand his attitude of assuming everything should go his way. The thought of marrying him started to feel less and less appealing. The day after this conversation, Mike's mother, Emily, called me directly.
Catherine, I heard you're not planning to be involved in our family business.
That's correct.
We can't welcome someone like that as a daughter-in-law.
But I'm not ready to quit my job just yet.
Accounting is the same everywhere, isn't it?
Her sharp tone left me feeling intimidated.
In any case, come over this week and explain everything to the CEO directly. Got it?
Before I could respond, the call ended abruptly. I was left holding the phone, overwhelmed with the things that were spiraling out of control. That weekend, I visited Mike's parents again. They sat in the living room, glaring at me.
Mike, are you sure about this girl?
We don't need someone who's not cooperative in our family.
They said whatever they wanted without restraint. Mike turned to me, pleading.
Catherine, please, quit your job and join the family business.
But there was no way I could agree to that.
I want to continue my current job. Please understand.
But if you stay in New York, how can we have a proper marriage?
That's true, but,
Do you even want to get married?
well,
I couldn't bring myself to say yes when asked so directly. Frustrated by my indecisive attitude, Mike's parents finally snapped.
That's enough. Just leave.
I was then kicked out of their house. For a while after that, I didn't receive any contact from Mike. I tried to console myself, thinking that even if the marriage fell through, at least things wouldn't escalate further. Oddly, I felt a small sense of relief. Then, about 2 weeks later, Mike called me in a serious tone.
My parents want to meet with your parents this weekend. They want to discuss what's next.
I knew immediately what that meant. The engagement was off. Even though I'd been having doubts about the marriage, I realized I still loved Mike. Hearing those words, tears began to flow. I thought I'd be happy. How did things go so wrong? What could I have done differently? I kept asking myself these questions, but no answers came. Accepting that it was over, I decided to take some time off and returned to my family home for the first time in a long while. I had already told my parents that I had accepted Mike's proposal. However, I hadn't updated them about what had happened since then. They'd been asking,
When's the wedding? Have you set up the meeting with the families yet?
but I had dodged their questions. Finally, I decided I couldn't keep it from them any longer and told them everything.
Dad, Mom. I'm sorry for keeping quiet until now. The engagement will likely be called off.
What?
What happened? Why would it end like this?
Their shock was palpable. I explained everything. Mike's parents' behavior, his sudden change in attitude, and the way they had treated me. My parents listened, their expressions reflecting both understanding and anger.
What selfish people.
My mother said.
Absolutely outrageous.
My father agreed, pulling me into a comforting hug.
If the engagement is off, then it's for the best. But you should make sure to handle things properly.
My father advised.
That's right. It's good that you learned all this before getting married.
Their words brought a sudden release of all the tension I had been carrying. My shoulders sagged, and tears rolled down my cheeks.
Catherine, there are plenty of men out there. Don't worry about this.
Her words helped me regain some strength. In hindsight, breaking off the engagement might actually be the right decision. I finally felt at ease, which was then replaced by a simmering anger at how Mike and his family had treated us. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The day came for me to visit Mike's family again. His parents greeted me with scowls, looking down on me as if I were some kind of commoner. They didn't even bother to offer me a drink as a guest.
Catherine, let's call off the engagement.
Mike said bluntly, without a shred of remorse. I had expected this outcome and remained composed. Saying nothing. I just looked at Mike. His parents took this as a cue to pile on, explaining at length why I was unfit for their prestigious family.
Catherine, someone like you, who isn't willing to devote herself to her husband, just doesn't belong here.
We come from a distinguished lineage. To be honest, your family just doesn't measure up.
Up until this point, my father had stayed silent. However, he abruptly interrupted them, his voice filled with fury.
What exactly do you mean by that? Stop beating around the bush and say it plainly.
Offended by his directness, their expressions turned downright hostile.
If we have to spell it out, fine. You're just poor, low-class folk.
We won't allow our son to marry someone from a rural family of commoners.
I couldn't believe how casually they used such demeaning language in front of others. By this point, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just disgusted. My parents exchanged weary glances, sighing deeply. It was clear that reasoning with them would be pointless.
Well, that settles it. We're leaving. Catherine, let's go.
My father said so as he stood up.
Yes, let's go.
I replied, following suit. As we were leaving, I turned back to Mike and said,
I hope you don't regret this.
With that, we walked out. About 2 weeks later, Mike's family contacted my father. It was Mike's father, John, his voice frantic as he demanded an explanation from my father.
What is the meaning of this?
What do you mean? You didn't want anything to do with us poor folks, right? So, we've decided not to renew the lease on the land we rent to your company.
What?
It's as you said. A company as prestigious as yours shouldn't be involved with a small-town landlord like me. I'll make sure the lease ends cleanly, to avoid burdening you with any association.
What Mike's family had failed to consider was that my father's real estate company wasn't just a small operation. He owned significant properties and counted many major companies as his clients, including theirs. One of the properties my father owned was directly tied to Turner Paper. The parking lot for about 100 employees and part of the factory grounds belonged to my father. If the lease on that land was terminated, Turner Paper's operations would grind to a halt. John's panic was easy to imagine. Why hadn't he recognized my father as one of his business partners? It was a glaring oversight, unbecoming of a competent CEO.
You can't be serious. This would destroy our operations.
Well, it's just business.
My father replied calmly.
If there's a risk of unpaid rent, we can't continue the lease.
What are you talking about? We've always paid the rent on time.
You'll understand soon enough. In any case, the lease ends in 2 months. That's plenty of time to find a new location.
John was speechless in the face of my father's composed and logical response.
And one more thing.
My father added.
I will never forgive anyone who disrespects my daughter.
With that, he ended the call. A few days later, both Turner Paper and Mike's family home were audited by the IRS. The charges? Tax evasion. It turned out to be entirely true. The koi fish and luxury cars that Mike had bragged about were purchased with company funds, but the assets were registered under his father's name. He had been funneling company profits into his personal accounts. The accusations included tax evasion, embezzlement, and breach of trust. Though they avoided criminal charges, they were forced to pay nearly $10 million in back taxes, penalties, and interest. Our family had orchestrated the perfect revenge. We had discussed every detail carefully. The significance of the land my father owned was essential to Turner Paper's operations. Mike's careless remarks about company funds hinted at tax fraud. My father consulted a lawyer and prepared to terminate the land lease, while also reporting the suspected tax evasion to the IRS. It was a calculated move, leveraging our knowledge of accounting and business to hold them accountable. Later, I learned that John had long been considered an incompetent CEO. He had inherited the company from his father, but lacked both the skill and knowledge to manage it. Known as a reckless second-generation heir, he had run the company poorly for years. The tax scandal was the final blow. Turner Paper's reputation plummeted, with clients severing ties and employees resigning en masse. The company was reportedly on the verge of bankruptcy. My father had seen this coming and cut ties with them early. Amid the chaos, Mike reached out to me. I expected an apology, but instead, he had the audacity to ask for reconciliation.
Catherine, can't we try again?
What are you talking about?
Please, my family is in serious trouble. I need your help.
It was almost laughable.
Oh. And what would you like from someone as poor as me?
I quit my job, and if this keeps up, I'll be out on the street. Couldn't you at least ask your father to reconsider the land lease?
That's impossible. My father doesn't run a charity.
But
I coldly dismissed him and ended the conversation. Turner Paper narrowly avoided bankruptcy but is now operating on a shoestring budget, unable to secure further loans from banks. The speed of their downfall was staggering. It was clear just how poorly the company had been managed and how unprepared they were for any crisis. Mike's family, who had basked in their inherited wealth and looked down on others as if they were nobility, had fallen spectacularly. I decided to watch their decline from a distance, a fitting end to their arrogance. I cut off all contact with Mike after that. I didn't want him clinging to me, and more than anything, I wanted to move on. I've started dating someone new, a kind, respectful man who values others.
There are plenty of men out there.
My mother's words echo in my mind.
Catherine, would you consider dating me with marriage in mind?
His sincere words really touched me. Even though the word marriage still made me hesitate for a moment, he simply held me without saying a word, offering silent reassurance. I want to build a life with him and together find true happiness.